everybody. I'm Jackie K. Cooper, and it is my great pleasure to have a chance to interview today William Kent Krueger, who is the author of my favorite book of 2023, The River We Remember. It's just a fantastic book, Kent. Thank you for the pleasure I got from reading that book.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jackie. And I'm so pleased to hear that you enjoyed the book. I enjoyed writing it, I hope, as much as you enjoyed reading it.
That that makes me feel even better. That it wasn't just an exercise in novel writing. It was something that you enjoyed and took pleasure in. I discovered you with Ordinary Grace. Now, I don't know if I did a little bit of research, but that was the first book that I think David Brown, your publicist at Atria, kind of said, here's a book I think you'll like. and I read it and loved it.
Well, it was the novel that certainly broke me out to a much larger audience, Jackie. Before that, I was known primarily as a mystery writer, but with Ordinary Grace, a lot of folks who wouldn't necessarily read mysteries discovered my work, and then many of them went back to read my mysteries as well.
Well, I'm going to confess to you, I have read, Ordinary Grace, The Tender Land, The River We Remember. I have not read the detective series. Because I know if I read one, then it's going to be, I've got to read 15 or however many that you've written, and I have so many other things I have to do. But quick question too, out at the start. I'm a movie, TV critic on the side, book critic.
Yep.
Has there been any movie interest in your books?
Well, my work has been optioned pretty much since my first novel was published a quarter of a century ago. So I've been dealing with Hollywood for a very long time. Nothing's come to fruition yet, but as you know, Hollywood is really a difficult environment to get anything accomplished. My Cork O'Connor series is currently optioned, and they are looking to create a series for one of the streaming platforms. And we are currently in negotiations for the rights to this Tender Land. And Ordinary Grace has been optioned in the past, and we continue to have lots of interest in that. My guess is, and my agent's guess is that we're going to have lots of interest in The River We Remember as well.
But this seems to be the time for authors. I mean, we've got, the Bosch series, we've got the Reacher series, we've got the Will Trent series. All of those were popular books before they ever, made it to TV. It wasn't like the books followed after the book TV series or streaming series had already been established. I just finished watching Lessons in Chemistry. I can't remember Bonnie. I can't think of her last name right off. But it was a 8-episode streaming series, and it gave so much time for so much depth. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can see The River We Remember being done that way, and all those characters getting the chance to come alive. Oh, that would
with the streaming platforms now, those options, it becomes feasible to really do a book correctly. When you try to compress a great story into an hour and a half or a 2-hour film experience, it loses so much. But with the streaming platforms now in a multiple series, episode series, it becomes possible to really do justice to a good story.
Well, if they did The River We Remember, if they did the whole book in a series, I would be all for a season 2 to have you take those characters even further. But one of the things that, I was talking to David Brown, the other day about your work. And I said, the reason I want to talk to Kent is because you live in Minnesota.
That's correct.
Okay. But you sound like a Southern writer. I, I don't know if you know what I mean, but Conroy, that all of that ilk of writers had a melancholy about them and their stories. And I find that in yours, especially The River We Remember.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
It's meant as a
Southern writers, they're so lush in the prose that they create. Their stories can be a little on the melancholy side, but the language that they use in telling their stories is just stellar language. So, and my father was a high school English teacher, Jackie, so I strive to have powerful language in the forefront of all of my stories.
well, I will tell you, there are 50 zillion characters. I was going to ask you, who is the lead character in The River We Remember?
You
Is it
know, it
Ernie? Is it the boy? Is it the sheriff?
it begins with Brody. It sort of focuses on him to
Sheriff.
begin with, but that story expands so much, and it becomes the story of so many other characters. Because I wanted to, at the heart of the novel is the question: how do we heal from the great wounds that life delivers to us in so many different ways? And so we begin with Brody, wounded by war. We expand to Charlie Bauer, wounded because she didn't receive the love of her father. The wounding from the prejudices that so many people hold against others who are different. The woundings that come from the abuse that so many families experience. So it expanded so that there are lots of different characters telling their story. And I hope that it becomes a fabric woven in such a way that no particular thread stands out above the others.
That is a great answer because it's so, you know, each character in that book has such a full past, and you bring it, you integrate those backstories with the present stories in such a magnificent way that you feel like you're reading it and you're just expanding your enjoyment, expanding your enjoyment, expanding your enjoyment.
Jackie, when I used to teach creative writing, one of the things that I would try to hammer into my students' heads was this: a good story isn't really about what happens, it's about who it happens to. And so when I create a story, the characters are what fascinate me most. And the ways in which they interact and create the plot is terrific. But first and foremost are the characters themselves, giving the reader characters that they can embrace fully as human.
Ken, are you one of these authors that outlines everything uh, in advance? I've talked to authors who say my outline's longer than my book. I think it's Jeffrey Deaver told me that. He said,
Yeah, Jeff's pretty famous for that.
yeah. And how about you? Do you outline? Do you know you're starting at point A and over here is point Z and you just follow the process, or does it come to you as you write?
Jackie, it depends on the kind of story I'm going to write. When I write a story in my Corporate Connor series, those are all essentially mysteries, and a mystery is a very tightly woven fabric of storytelling. Everything depends so significantly on everything else, and I think that the success of a mystery depends largely on the timing of the reveals. When you give the reader the clues that are going to be necessary to solving the mystery at the heart of the story. So when I write a novel in my Corporate Connor series, I try to think that story through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. At the end of that thinking process, which can last weeks or sometimes even months, I know how the story begins. I know how it ends. I know who did what to whom and why. I know the themes that I want to weave through the piece. But with my standalones, Ordinary Grace, This Tender Land, and The River We Remember, I wanted a different process. A mystery is an intellectual construct. It's a puzzle that you create in your head. These standalones don't come from my head, they come from my heart. And so I wanted a process that would allow the reader to feel like I'm telling you this straight from my heart. So going into the writing of those stories, I only knew a few salient elements that would be included in the story. And then I let the story and the characters reveal themselves to me in the creative process. And I got to tell you, um, the creation of those three novels are among the most extraordinary creative experiences I've ever had.
Where did the original germ of the idea come for The River We Remember?
Yeah, back in the early 1940s, my father graduated from high school and enlisted in the military service and marched off to Europe to fight in World War II. He was just a kid, he was 18 years old. He came back several years later, a man deeply wounded in body and in spirit by what the war had done to him. I realize now he was probably suffering from PTSD, but nobody talked about that back then. Or if they did, they called it shell shock or battle
I was
fatigue.
going to say, all I ever heard was shell shock.
Exactly. And like every kid, I pestered my father for stories about the war. Did you kill any Germans, Dad? He absolutely refused to talk about the war. And he was so like the fathers of my friends, guys who like my dad had gone off to fight in World War II or the Korean War. And they were just kids, some of them not even old enough to shave yet. And they came back men wounded deeply by the horrors that they had seen and the horrors that they had been a part of. And all my life, I've wondered, how could anybody heal from that kind of wounding? And what about the people they left behind, the ones who loved them, their wives, their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, people who I'm sure were praying for them desperately while they were off fighting, and maybe who in the end lost them on the battlefield? How did they heal from their wounds? How did anybody manage to find a way to heal? And that was really the starting point for The River We Remember.
Well, get some more inspiration. When's the next standalone going to be coming forward?
I'm at work on it now.
Yay!
I'm just starting to ease my way into it. It's going to be a tricky novel if I'm able to pull it off. But I'm looking forward to just having a great deal of fun in the writing of it.
I have all the confidence in the world you'll pull it off.
Well, it'll be a couple of years in the creating process, I'm sure. At least a couple of years.
I'm not getting any younger. Turn these books out. But one thing that I know about you, that your reputation is that you are a person who almost thrives on the book circuit process. I've talked to people who've been to book signings where you're there, and they say you're just so there. It's not, you don't phone it in, right? But that's your reputation. Do you really enjoy the travel and all with the publicity of the book?
Well, I enjoy the events immensely, Jackie. The travel is something else, but the travel's necessary in order to do the book events. For The River We Remember, I did almost 50 signings across the country. And I have toured significantly with every book from the very beginning. In the beginning, it was important for me to do because I paid for my early book tours. And it was important. It was an important thing I thought to do because it introduced me to the booksellers. And those are the people who are going to be in your corner, who you need to have in your corner if you're going to create a broader reading audience. Because if you go to a bookstore, they sell your book before you get there. They sell your book while you're there. And if they really like you, they will continue to hand sell that book when you leave. So I know a vast array of booksellers across the country who have been instrumental in helping me reach a much broader reading audience. And I just get so much energy from an audience when I do a signing in person.
I know you're not through with publicizing The River We Remember yet, because you're going to do an event with a very, very good friend of mine, and that is Mary Alice Monroe
Oh, sure.
at Wild Dunes. I think January 14th.
Yeah, just it's coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, have you met Mary Alice in person, or?
We have never met in person. She was part of a group who invited me to Zoom with them, and we met virtually that way and connected very nicely. And so we have communicated virtually. I'm looking so forward to actually meeting Mary Alice at Wild Dunes.
Mary Alice is wonderful. I've known her for many, many years now. I did the Wild Dunes event several years
Okay.
ago. It was just fantastic.
Oh, good.
But you're going to have such a great time. It's such a beautiful locale in South Carolina, and I was so pleased. Mary Alice sent me the announcement, and I thought, gosh, Krueger's going to be there. What a great thing.
Well,
And
it's a very worthwhile cause, and honest to God, any Minnesotan is going to look for a good excuse to get out of Minnesota in the winter and go someplace like South Carolina.
great place. That's my home state. Great place to visit at any time, but especially escaping the winter cold. But she will treat you royally. She is Southern hospitality personified. So,
Yeah, I'm sure. And the organization for the event has been, so far as I can tell, just stellar. I'm very much looking forward to it, Jackie.
tell her I said hello.
Indeed, I will.
That
We'll toast a glass of wine.
Yeah,
We'll,
Jackie.
lift a glass of wine to toast in your honor.
Uh, Again, you did Friends in Fiction too,
Right. It was Friends in Fiction
and Mary Alice
when
was.
Mary Alice was still associated with the group.
Yeah, I just saw Patty a couple of
Okay.
weeks ago, and she also is a great friend, and so proud of everything they've done. Just really great. But let's get back to how did you decide, or how did you get the chance to be an author? I mean, because I talk to people all over the place who say, "Oh, I want to be an author. I want to write a book. I want to do this," and 80% don't get the opportunity.
Yeah, I hear from those
I
people all the time too.
bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah, Jackie, I was one of those people who was really fortunate. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, a storyteller, right from the get-go, as far back as I can remember. And I'm sure that was the influence of my folks. When I grew up, my folks, I hope, like your folks, read to me. So as a kid, I never went down for a nap. I never went to bed at night without a story being read to me. So I grew up thinking of the world in terms of stories. And I always wanted to be one of the storytellers. So I have always written. I served a rather long apprenticeship. I didn't publish my first novel until I was 48 years old. That was Iron Lake, the first in my Cork O'Connor series. But that opened the door for me to begin making my living as a writer, which is a dream I'd always had.
Was it just a random submission though?
Oh no, there's a great story around that. Do you have time?
I want to hear the great story.
So this was back in the mid 90s, and I had gotten my manuscript for Iron Lake in the best shape I could possibly get it. And I did what you were supposed to do back then. I queried agents in New York City. I sent out 36 query letters. I got 6 responses. All of them said, no, thank you very much. These were all form rejections, Xeroxed form rejections. And the level of an interest in my work was clearly communicated to me because a couple of those Xeroxed form letters had been Xeroxed crooked on the page. Nobody paid any attention. But about that point in time, some friends of mine who also wanted to be mystery writers went to a conference in Chicago, writers conference. They came back and they said, we have your agent. The keynote speaker that year was a woman named Jane Jordan Brown, who had a literary agency in Chicago. And her keynote speech was, how do you get an agent? My friends brought me back a tape of her talk. And when I listened to it, I realized Jane wasn't telling these aspiring writers, this is how you get just any old agent. She was saying, this is how you get me. Jane Jordan Brown is your agent. And when I listened really closely, Jackie, it seemed to me basically what Jane was advising those aspiring authors was this: if you want me, Jane Jordan Brown, as your agent, you need to say something very nice about me in your query letter. So I spent a couple of weeks coming up with a great compliment to pay Jane. I led my query letter with it. I sent it off, and 2 weeks later, she called me and said, I want to see your manuscript. I sent it off to her, and 6 weeks later, she got back to me. 6 weeks, fast turnaround time, sign of a good agent. But she said, I'm not going to represent you. Your novel is too long. It was 500 pages. She said, I can't sell a first novel this long, but if you're willing to cut it by 100 pages, I'll be happy to look at it again. 100 pages, that was like asking me to cut off my right arm, but if that's what it was going to take, that's what I was going to do. So I reeled it back in, and over the course of the next year, I actually cut it by 120 pages. I sent it back to Jane. She said, this is exactly what I was looking for. Let's go. I will represent you. She sent that manuscript in November of that particular year to 6 of the largest New York publishing houses with this very bold demand. Do you want to publish Kent's novel, give us an answer by Christmas. Now, what you probably know, but I didn't know then, it's
Love
nothing
this.
Christmas. They all leave the city. They go to the Poconos or Berkshires or Florida, wherever they go for vacation. And the publishing business pretty much grinds to a halt. So Christmas rolls around and we haven't heard anything. New Year's rolls around. We still haven't heard anything. I still remember, Jackie, this really bleak night in the middle of January. I'm sitting at the kitchen table. My wife, Diane's at my side, trying to console me. I've got my head in my hands and I'm whining something like, nobody wants my book. Nobody wants my book. Well, I get a call from Jane. It was either the next day or the day after that saying somebody wants your book. She explained that it was an offer from St. Martin's Press, one of the finest mystery imprints in New York City. It was a first author contract offer, not a lot of money, but somebody wanted my book. I said, wonderful, Jane, where do I sign? And she said, you're not going to sign because I think you're going to get another offer. The next day we got an offer from Simon and Schuster, and it was a much better offer. I said, wonderful, Jane. Where will I sign? And she said, you're not going to sign because I've called St. Martin's and told them about Simon and Schuster's offer. I think they'll make a counteroffer. The next day we got a counteroffer from St. Martin's. They said, not only will we give him more money for Iron Lake, we know he's at work on a second book. We'll buy that one too. I said, wonderful, Jane. Where do I sign? And she said, you're not going to sign because I've called Simon and Schuster, told them about St. Martin's offer. I think they'll make a counter offer. And the next day we got a 2-book counter offer that was so lucrative we couldn't turn it down. So Jackie, every writer's dream is that a bidding war is going to break out for the rights to your work. And that happened with my first novel.
That is a wonderful story.
I love telling that story.
I know you should, and and that should be encouraging. I mean, that should be because it can happen. It can happen.
That's one of the things that I try to communicate when I speak to a group of aspiring writers. One of the things it means to be a writer is to live in hope. And I'm here to tell you that hope can pay off. Sometimes your deepest dreams do come true.
I was at the Mercer Authors Luncheon, which is an event that's held in Atlanta every year, and Mercer University Press is my publisher.
Okay.
I was talking to one of the speakers there, and I was telling him about the YouTube experience, how I got into this. And then I wrote for the Huffington Post. At one time, they called me in Perry, Georgia. How they ever even found out I existed, I'll never know. And then I told him about getting with Mercer and I've had 8 books published now. And he was a minister, and he said, your life has been one consistent set of sacred serendipities. I loved it. I thought,
sacred serendipities. I love that.
Isn't that a great phrase?
Yeah.
And with my life, it has been that. I haven't planned the things that have happened, and all of these wonderful things have evolved and come to me, such as interviewing someone of your stature.
But Jackie, getting back to what aspiring writers need to do, those people who say, oh, I have this book, I really want to write it. They need to do what you've done and what I've done. Sit down and do the work, hour after hour after hour. It's putting in all of those hours of writing that ends up in the place where we are.
But because I know you get it too. People think, well, you can just tell me how to be you. No, the me you're seeing now and the me that I'm seeing with you is not the you that 20 years ago was putting in the work and continue to put in the work. It's not a pass, go, collect $200 type thing. You have to work.
And here's the other thing, Jackie. You have to love the work. You have to love the sitting down day after day after day and working with words. Because if you're doing it for any other reason than it's your passion, I think you're going to end up disappointed and probably just, opting out of that journey.
I don't want to get real woo here, but there are times that I sit and I start to write a story.
Mm-hmm.
And Kent, I don't remember writing it.
Oh, I've been there.
Don't you love it? I
Yeah.
wish there was some secret where I'd say, okay, I'm going to sit down now and have that feeling where it just passes through me onto the page. Can't make it. But when it happens, oh my gosh, what an
You
experience.
know, every writer I know, Jackie, talks about the magic that's involved in this. And those of us who are writers, we get that. I'm not sure, I try to communicate that to audiences. I'm not quite sure all of them get it, but there is such magic.
There is.
Inexplicable things happen when you
Yes.
sit down and you really sink yourself deeply into the imagining of a story.
You know, and I think if you are a writer, if that is your destiny, then you have to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know what jobs you had, but I was a lawyer. I went all the way through law school, passed the bar, practiced law, and never liked it. Uh,
Most lawyers I know are
they
sorry
don't.
they became
No.
lawyers.
Most lawyers you talk to will say, if I had it to do over with,
Yep.
I'd do this. But I remember the day I came home and told my wife, I can't do this anymore. I'm not happy. I was writing stories for the newspaper and I wanted to expand on that. And I moved into another job that gave me more free time and started trying to, do a little bit of something with movie reviews, book reviews, whatever. And then the books just kind of came out of that magically. And
Yeah.
but if you're right, you have to write. You can't do anything. You have to. Even if you never get published, you have to write.
Yeah.
But I love you talking about being read to and being told stories from your parents, because we're not the same age, but we're not that far apart. And when I was growing up in South Carolina, we lived in a neighborhood and there was no air conditioning, no television at the time. But the neighbors would bring chairs and they'd sit in the yard. And children could sit. They couldn't participate in the conversation. They could sit. I sat there and heard story after story, and that fascinated me. And the storytelling and the differences and how things happened and occurred and what impact they had made. And I'm afraid we're losing that now.
Yeah, me too. Me too, Jackie. Me too.
And that's sad. I talk to people and I'll say, get your stories down, take a tape recorder, type them up, write them down. And I'll go to talk to the group. Now, I remember this one lady said, oh, that was my Uncle Jack. My Uncle Jack knew every story in our family. It was so great. We'd go and he'd tell us story after story after story. And I said, get a microphone in front of that man, get those stories down. And she said, oh, he died last year. And
See,
all the stories died with him.
Yep. It's gone now. It's gone.
And every family has a set of stories. That's what I want to do. But but you can create stories.
But that all of the stories I create go back to something deep inside me that is special to me.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful that you can excuse me, draw upon that and do it. You can't, I could talk to you for 100 more hours, but this really has been a lot to me because once I read Ordinary Grace, I was hooked. I mean, it was like, when's the next one? When's the next one? When's the next one? And I'm certainly going to be looking forward to your next one. And who knows, I might just start on the detective series and hide off in a corner somewhere and not be seen for days.
Well, I will warn you, Jackie, if you read one, you're going to have to read the rest.
I know that's true. I know that's true. But I wish you only the best. I appreciate so much you taking the time to do this. Enjoy your trip to South Carolina. I know you're going to have a wonderful time there. And keep me up to date on what you're doing.
Indeed, I will. And thanks so much for the invitation to speak with you. I so enjoyed our conversation. Jackie, thanks so much.
Thank you. This has been Jackie K. Cooper with my interview with William Kent Krueger.